Welcome to PR Done and Dunner. I'm your host, Bob Geller. Let me say I'm thrilled to speak with our next guest. He's a prolific blogger and B2B tech PR guy, so we have a lot in common. We have collaborated over the years on blogging topics and social media. He's always covering interesting things and has been a go-to source for me for topics related to not just tech PR, but about PR technology, which we'll be talking about a lot. I count my guest as one of those great people I've kind of come to know through blogging and social media that I've never actually met in IRL, spoken with, or even heard his voice until today. So if you're in the field of tech marketing and PR, you probably know his name as he is a top PR influencer. Of course, I'm talking about Frank Strong of the Sword and Script fame. Welcome, Frank. How are you?
Hey, good, Bob. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Great to have you on and finally talk to you, hear your voice.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking the number of people that I first met on social or in the social world and later met in person has grown, prolifically over the years.
Isn't that great? It's great to finally see somebody and speak with them, and maybe even meet actually in real life at one point. But the name of your practice and blog offers some clues, I think, Sword and Script. But maybe you could share with our audience a bit about your background, and I think that'll give some nice context for our discussion.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to make it brief. Grew up in an agency, worked for small firms, worked for one that got acquired by Hill & Knowlton, so worked in a big firm for a long while. Went in-house, worked for in-house side, small, medium, large. Startups, publicly traded company, and then at LexisNexis, my last gig before opening up my own shop was truly global company, 10,000 employees, owned by a holdings company with 30,000 employees, just a mammoth. And the Sword and the Script was a blog, and I mean, people that know me know I served in the reserve components of the military for more than 20 years. I've long since retired. You can retire from the reserves. I've retired 5-6 years ago and opened a business, but when I came home from Iraq in 2009, the world had just changed. Like there was all this blogging stuff and social media, and I was just trying to figure it out. So I started blogging, created the Sword and the Script. And many years later, when I decided to open up a business, I thought, well, I can go out and create a new business name and secure a URL, or I could just make my blog and turn that into a business. I already have an audience. People know me. I've built up some goodwill, and that's kind of what I did. And that's how I landed where I am today. Has
the name worked for you? I mean, do you think people get it?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in PR, we're supposed to be storytellers, right? So there's a little background story there, right? The sword is my military background, the things that taught me from being in the service, things like, detailed planning, adaptability, flexibility, perseverance, and the script is my view of the world from a PR lens, right? And so it's really those two things. People do ask, and then that leads to a very natural discussion.
I'm always impressed by how often you are posting, whether it's on your blog or on social media, and you're tracking some of the cool things happening in the field. And do you find it's hard to balance your time between the blogging and the client service?
Yes. I mean, it's a lot, but for me, the blog is a labor of love. Consistency in posting matters. I preach that to all clients. I think a lot of consultants and PR firms, they tend to be the classic case of the cobbler's kids. They have no shoes. I'm not going to be that. I'm out there, preaching to clients and need to be consistent. Mark Schaefer, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, had a wonderful comment I saw a couple of weeks ago that was like, consistency matters more than genius, right? And I really believe that. On the same note, I think being a writer makes me a better writer. So when I go and do client work, things come out easier because I'm writing all the time. It gives me better understanding, I think, of the media, because I know how hard it is to look at a blank page, think about what you're going to write. I get, tons of annoying pitches, too. So filtering through those. So it gives you some appreciation and perspective. And so I think it all works well together. It is a balancing act. If you love what you do, it's not hard, and I do. I live, breathe, eat this stuff. So
it's kind of like walking in a journalist's shoes, right? You get a sense of what it's like to be a journalist. You're putting stories together, right? You're getting pitches.
And building an audience, like I think that
Yeah.
is a undervalued skill these days, particularly with the rise of, so-called content marketing. I think people get really confused about what that means. They think all marketing is content, and that's true, but that's not the same thing as content marketing, which means building an audience of subscribers, right? And that is a skill that you have to learn. And you do that on your own when you have a blog. You have a chance to experiment, try different things that you can't just do on a corporate side. But if you've done them on your own personal experience, you come into a corporation and say, look, I've done this and here are the results. Here's, I've got some experience pulling this off. So the experiments that you do, you're able to apply into your professional work.
That's great. I usually save this for the end, but since we're on the topic now, but you can just share a few words about your practice, the kind of clients you have, and the kind of things you've been working on. I think it's tech, right? B2B tech.
Yeah, all B2B tech. Yeah, exclusively. So martech, fintech. I do a lot of legal tech. I got into that at LexisNexis, which people think law and they're like, oh, it just sounds boring and goofy. But I'll tell you what, it has been a wonderful addition to the skill set and knowledge of an industry that I have. It is a fascinating study in economics. There is, depending on whose numbers you believe, anywhere between 100 and 300 billion dollars in that trade hands in the U.S. legal services market every year. So it is
crazy.
there's a lot of money floating around, and it's just a fascinating industry to be in. There's a lot of VC piling money into legal tech because the amount of money that trades hands. So it's really been interesting.
That's great. That's great. And I assume you take clients from all over. You're not a regional. I mean, you're national, international. Or what's your client base like?
Yeah, I've had since I'm in Atlanta, I've only had one client in Atlanta. They're not a client presently. I still do some project work for them, but everybody else is regional. So I've got a client in Raleigh, where I used to live, and that's kind of how I got them, is all through networking, people that I know. I have a client in London. Actually, I have two clients in London right now. So that's kind of developed in, and those are all things. Really, one just kind of started from a cold pitch. I saw something that they had, and I was like, I could see their problem, and I wrote the CMO. I was like, I know your space inside and out, and
that's great.
Here's 1, 2, 3 things I can fix you, and boom, I had a call, and yeah, so just been a great client. I love working with people in the UK. They just seem to have a different take on marketing and PR. They're very open-minded. They want to try new things. They want to break into the US market. They love having someone with boots on the ground, so to speak, here. So.
What about military defense tech or criminal, public safety? Maybe it seems that would be natural for your background. Those some of those areas.
Yeah, I haven't really gotten into that. I dabbled a little bit. There was a guy I had several years ago from a big security company that had kind of an inbound request and asked. And I talked to him a little bit, but I feel like my skill set has been in B2B tech. I know that industry inside and out. I know the business models. I know they have, even in different industries, there's a lot of overlap and understanding.
Sure.
And I think security, there's some natural things, but there's other nuances to the business that you would just have to work so much harder to get a understanding of. And I would be dismissing the 20 years of experience I have in B2B tech, if that makes sense. And then with respect to DoD stuff, just navigating government contracts is just, I'm a one-man shop. It's just overwhelming. So, at one point I thought about sending out letters to some of the big agencies here in Atlanta, being like, look, if you want a veteran-owned business, a certified veteran-owned business, help you tick a box, I'd be happy to, work with you on a couple projects, but I've just never gotten around to doing that. I've always been pretty busy. So.
Good. Getting back to the blogging side, I'd love to hear your take on the state of blogging and social media engagement. I don't know about you. I think I've noticed kind of a drop off since the pandemic. Or have you found that behaviors changed at all in social media, or would you say it's much the same as it had been before, as far as?
Yeah, I haven't noticed any drop off in social media. I think for brand engagement is depressingly low, fractions of a percent engagement rates. But that's all, that's the social media companies depressing brand reach because they want you to buy ads. That's the model that they have. I think with individuals, you can still get good engagement, but the thing is you have to engage too. If you're just throwing stuff out on Twitter and you think people are gonna like and retweet and share and comment. They're not, unless you're doing that too. That's kind of how that works. If you're active, engaged, and talking to people on Twitter, it tends to reciprocate. So I personally believe, I have no proof, but I think the algorithm rewards that. If you're active and engaged, it's more engaging with it's more likely to surface the things that you share too.
That makes sense. I mean, that's the way it should work, right? And as far as your blogging, I mean, I read your most recent blog. I thought I died and gone to heaven. The fact that the C-suite is getting or recognizing the contribution of communications professionals from Gartner, right? That's pretty cool.
I think it's awesome.
About time, right?
Yeah, I mean, for people that don't know, Gartner, is kind of a B2B tech analyst firm that kind of, in a sense, tries to help corporate clients make sense of technologies that are available. And it often is distilled into a short list. They write a report. If your company's named in the report, you're on the short list for procurement department, somebody you'll get a look at for whatever technology you're in. They cover all different kinds of technology. And for them they've started going down this track of covering marketing. And if they've covered PR and communications before, I'm not aware of it. This is the first time that I've seen that. And I thought, that's really coming into its own. Like, it's about time.
Yeah, I think Forrester has dabbled a bit there too. But I guess, listen, like anyone else, they want to grow their business, they want to expand their coverage areas. So I guess it's not terribly surprising to me. Some of the posts I've enjoyed the most from your blog cover PR technology. And I think we've been hit with the rap in PR that we're not as sophisticated as other areas of advertising and marketing technologies. We're kind of laggards. What do you feel? I mean, do you feel like we're catching up, or do you agree with that?
I do. I think they kind of go hand in hand. The marketing community is definitely way more sophisticated, but it's also bigger. Departments tend to be larger. There's more people in them. They tend to have bigger budgets. So that just naturally attracts more innovation. It creates more options. I mean, I look at like PPC or email marketing or television. Like the last time I checked television ads, I mean, it's like $80 billion market. I mean, it's huge, right? What's PR, 10, 15? It's really hard to quantify because, you're looking at revenue from agencies, and that doesn't account for like corporate communications departments and their salaries. Like you can't get a handle on that. So sizing the PR market's really hard, but I think it's suffice to say it's a lot smaller. And so that's why the larger marketing community attracts more funding. I do think PR has been traditionally slower to adopt new technologies. I think if you're in the PR side and you report into marketing, or you're closely aligned with marketing, you're probably a little more adaptive of new technologies. If you're purely on the communication side, and not kind of doing public affairs stuff, corporate responsibility, you're probably not doing a whole lot of you're probably not having a whole lot of new technologies coming your way that you're interested in looking at. But I think that's starting to change. There's a whole crop of new startups, and there's just a lot of money flowing into the space, and I think that's getting some of the larger companies on their toes and trying to do some innovation and changing things. So
yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of this gets to how you define PR, which service to include or not. Once you add content marketing, social media, suddenly there's probably a lot more technology that can help out. But looking at the average agency or the average internal PR team, what do you think should be part of the tool set when it comes to technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a really difficult one to answer because it depends on what your focus is, right? And you just kind of alluded to this a little bit. If you're doing a lot of content and social, there are different tools available to you than if you're a pure play media relations company. So, I think what you have in your tool set depends on what you need. I hope I'm not jumping the gun on your questions here, but one of the questions I kind of was thinking about is you asked, like, this stuff's so expensive. How can an agency pull it off?
Exactly.
And I think that the answer to that is it can't be about cost cutting, right? It used to be the pitch for technology was buy this tool and it's going to save you X dollars. And I think that's exactly the wrong way to go about it. May have worked at one time, doesn't work anymore today. Why? Because communication as a function is infinitely harder than it was 10 or 15 years ago. There's just more stuff. There's influencers, there's social media people, there's bloggers, there's all the media landscape, the traditional media landscape is fractured. There's podcasts, there's all these different things, and it's noisy, and there's a lot of funding going around. It's really hard to cut through the clutter. And so communications is infinitely harder. And so what does that mean from a technology standpoint? It can't be, how is this technology going to save me money? It's got to be, how does this technology enable me to deliver services at scale? How does it make me smarter, right? And you factor that into the value that you deliver to your clients. So if you buy a technology, it's got to be able to let you deliver better services that keeps you in demand, that allows you to have pricing power. And I think that's the approach that it's got to be. But you've got to be on your toes to know what's available, and you really have to understand your needs and going out and procuring that kind of software or technology tools to make you smarter.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's a differentiator and does help you, I guess, have some of those nice characteristics. I guess the other side of it is if it's everybody has a decision or everybody has a trend kite or whatever, then, what's the advantage?
Yeah, that's right. There's some of that. But there's a whole lot of new players out there too, worth taking a look. So, and we dive into some of that, or, however you want to approach it.
Well, maybe I could, I mean, if you have anything top of mind, that's great. I can always put a link also in the show description and let people check out. So if you have if you've written on any of these, more recent technology vendors, solutions, that might be an idea too.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
any come to mind immediately as far as anything that's really impressive or?
If I took, so I'm very careful to not make recommendations.
Okay.
Right. Because, so I'm not like, hey, go out and buy this thing. So this isn't an endorsement. What I do try to do is get people to take a look at different tools that they may not have thought of. We've got like, what are the two standbys? It's Cision and Meltwater.
Right.
Cision, I think, has gone out and made a bunch of acquisitions, and I haven't seen a whole lot of real innovation out of them. Meltwater, on their hand, I think, is doing some innovation. They've also made a lot of acquisitions, but they're expanding their horizon. They're looking at a total addressable market that isn't just PR anymore. It includes marketing. So depending on where your shop sits in the organization, that may or may not be appealing. Some of the other folks from an all-in-one perspective that are interesting is Agility PR Solutions, right? That was formed out of the spinoff from PR Newswire. So Agility was the media database that PR Newswire had, that Cision had to spin off because the DOJ told them it would, made a ruling in order for you to acquire PR Newswire, you have to spin that off. And then Innodata, which is the parent company, bought that. In any case, Agility PR Solutions is an all-in-one tool worth looking at. Might be a little more cost conscious. Critical Mention, which grew up really as a rival to TVI's, all in broadcast monitoring. They're starting to become an all-in-one suite. Notified was Cision grew up in Sweden. Notified was a little startup out of Sweden. Cool little tool, got acquired by, gosh, I'm drawing a blank on it. A big company, West Corporation,
Yeah,
rebranded as Intrado. And so then now Intrado has different business units, and the Notified business unit is the PR tool. I haven't seen a lot of innovation out of those guys lately, but I looked at that tool a couple of years ago. Really sexy, really slick. Propel is a new little
I
startup
was just gonna ask you about them.
that's out there. I haven't looked at those guys real closely yet. I'm going to do probably a deep dive in a couple months. They just got some funding, but I mean, I think they look kind of interesting. So that guy was like, hey, Zach Cutler is the founder. He's like, look, I was a agency guy. I went to buy tech. I couldn't find a tech that met my needs. And so I started making one, and it kind of got legs. And so I sold my agency, and now I'm developing this software company. I've heard that story before, but I just think it's more believable with him. And they're doing some cool stuff. Like, you look at some of the bigger vendors, they're like, well, come into our system and send your emails out through our system. And PR people are like, I don't want to do that. I work in Outlook. I want to work in Outlook. And so what Propel has done that's neat, they're like, okay, cool. You can work in Outlook. Here's a plugin. Install this and it'll track all your stuff in the database, right? So they've done some things that just, instead of like trying to get PR to adapt to the new technology, they're kind of trying to enable and make you a little bit smaller. And so again, not an endorsement, but those things are interesting. And so it's worth taking a look. I threw another name out there. I think Muckrack is one worth taking a look. Built on modern technology. It's well integrated. They're focused on collaboration. They're thinking about workflow. They say all the right things. They definitely are focused on PR. They seem to be open and receptive to feedback. So I think all of those things count. But it's definitely a crowded field, but there's, now we've got options, you don't have just Cision or Meltwater. Not saying you should exclude them. Take a look if you're looking at buying an all-in-one tool, but there are other options to consider as well.
That's a pretty good rundown. I mean, that's almost all the names that I'm familiar with. I guess aren't most of those suites though, all-in-one tools, or would you not?
Yeah, all of those, the ones that I mentioned are all-in-one tools. There's some other ones. I just looked at one called TrueScope. So did a big long briefing with them on my blog a week or two ago. They're just purely focused on monitoring. And the CEO is a guy that used to be the CEO of Isentia, which may not ring a bell for people in the US, but Isentia is basically like a Cision in the Asia Pacific market. And they ended up getting acquired, and he left. He's been gone several years now, started this company called TrueScope that's just focused on monitoring. So they're doing some cool things there. There's another one called Public Relay, which I think is near Tyson's Corner, Virginia. They just focused on monitoring. Signal AI is in the UK. They're just focused on monitoring. Obviously got AI in their name. Then you got folks like TBIs, which has been around for a long time, but pure play player just focused on broadcast monitoring. A lot of the all-in-one tools, you don't know it, but they white label their broadcast monitoring and some of their podcast monitoring too, right? I think there's some cool stuff on the other side. I don't want to ramble on, but even outside of like the core PR all-in-one tools, there's things like Social Chorus, which they were just acquired for $100 million by a private equity firm and merged with someone else, and they just rebranded, and the name escapes me. I think it was tragic that they changed their name, but if you Google Social Chorus, it will pop up. You will find them. I'll remember that name in a second. They're doing some very cool stuff from an internal communications perspective. So like, time delayed email. So hitting, you send out, you write your internal communications message, you send it out, and the tool will have it delivered at a time that's optimal for those employees because everybody's on it. It's an internal comms platform, giving you metrics and analytics. Are people actually reading these, right? How many times you send out a message, it may be hard for people to understand, but if you work for a big company like LexisNexis and you send out an email to 1,000 people, or you write an email for your business unit leader, they send it out. How do you know who read that, right? This is a tool that kind of gives you that feedback, right? So they're doing some cool things on the social side and on the mobile side, rather.
Maybe that gets to the gap in PR tech, because I've always wondered, why aren't the PR solutions, and I guess some of them are starting to do this now, but getting more scientific, more analytical. Like if I'm going to use your system to send an email out, or even use your system to send my campaign out through my Gmail, can I see what's open, what's unopened? Can I do an A/B test? Can I get a sense from your AI of the best time to send my blast so it reaches the right person? I mean, there's probably a million ways that technology could help. And I guess we sit back and say, why can't it do this? And it's easy to say that.
I think most of the vendors probably do basic open and read rates, right? Provided that it's not inhibited by like Apple's new privacy policy. Someone opens
right.
So that's going to come into play, but most of them offer that. Some of them, like I know Muckrack, for example, I'm pretty sure they have some additional pitch analytics. And I think, honestly, that's like a big area of opportunity, I think, for the vendors that they should capitalize on is like, don't just tell me who opened it, but use your tool to analyze all of the pitches that I've sent for the last 5 years and show me what are the keywords that tend to get open. Show me trends, right? Give me some insights so I can get better at what I'm doing. And I think there's some real value to be had there.
Well, on that note, there's been a few brave and bold and fairly high profile attempts to use AI to do some of those very things. Sharpen your pitches, make sure that they hit home. Are you familiar with any of them? Do you know if any of them actually work? Not that there's that many. There's a couple of names I can think of off the top of my head. But
yeah. So Notified, when I took a look at that tool, they were using AI to basically show you contacts you may not have thought of, right? I'm like, brilliant. The PR tech company should have been doing this all along. Hey, I noticed you pitched this person. You should also pitch this person, right? Because they've written about that topic, right? Why can't you have a tool that does that? So they've got one that they told me was doing that. And I didn't do a hands-on review, but I did kind of a briefing with them. So I got some screenshots about that. Propel, which we talked about, that's the startup run by Zach Cutler. They've got this thing called Pitch Prefer, which is supposed to analyze reporter preferences, right? And they're actually doing a very good job of analyzing the pitches sent through their system and coming up with like benchmarks of like, this is the open rate, and these are the types of publications that are more likely to open your pitch. And what you find is like the better publications, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, those reporters are more likely to look at your pitch. They may be less likely to cover it, but they're very careful. If you send them a good pitch, you're going to get a look.
That's a start anyway, to get them to take a look, right? Listen.
Yeah, for sure. Don't waste your pitches, and make sure that they're strategic, and you get relevancy there, because you'll get blacklisted. But you send a good pitch to a Wall Street Journal reporter, they're probably going to take a look at it.
Have you heard of this PR Profit? Have you heard of that one?
I have, yeah. That's a guy.
Quitkin, I think it's from at least one of the principals of Quitkin started it, as far as I know.
Yep, he's still the chairman of Aaron Quicken is still the chairman of his agency. It's a marketing agency. He is also the president of PRSA New York.
Right.
I've noticed PRSA New York does, they did like this, PR technology certification thing. So I mean, really? That kind of gets like a little sketchy to me. I would like to see a broader separation of powers, if you will. And, having the largest professional aid organization associated with a vendor, I think is scary. I think we should embrace vendors, but having, the guy in charge, I was also in charge of a tool. I don't know, it just gets a little sticky for me.
I see what you're saying.
But they do have an AI that they say analyzes millions of stories that reporters have written, and will give you a probability of whether or not your pitch will turn into coverage. So you're writing your pitch in the system, it's analyzing it against all of the news stories that reporter has written, and says, look, your chance of getting coverage is 3% or 5% or 20% or whatever it is that it says. I don't know this for sure, but I suspect a lot of these AI tools are probably white label. So it's probably somebody else, and there's a lot of this that goes on in PR tech. Like a lot of the monitoring people don't know are provided by, these back-end providers that are gleaning content, and then the tool just pulls it into the system for you. It's all transparent.
So it's not something, it's not original IP. It's not something.
Yeah, I suspect a lot of the AI that is coming into PR is probably, white labeled. Why is that? Because PR just doesn't, AI needs tons and tons and tons of data.
Exactly.
And PR just doesn't have it. So they've got to build that AI somewhere else on some other data set, and then kind of white label it and sell it off. So I think there's a lot of that going on. I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that's happening. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, for an end user, who cares if it's delivering value for you? That's what matters. Is it workable? Is it usable? Is it giving me something tangible, or is it just a buzzword and marketing collateral? So that's the thing that matters. I don't think there's anything. To me, white label is not a disparaging term, and I don't think vendors, should be afraid of it, and I don't think buyers should be afraid of it. Like I mentioned earlier, TVIs is a big tool that's white label for broadcast and podcast monitoring, or is often white labeled. People should embrace that. That's the industry standard. You want good broadcast monitoring, you want TVIs,
Sure, but I mean, if you want to be on the cutting edge, I mean, I have friends who were brilliant in AI, and they're doing some really cool AI startups, and they're using the latest and greatest technology, for example, to mine full text, like natural language processing. I don't think our industry has anything close to what they're doing,
Yeah, I mean, Meltwater is going down that track. They've actually invested quite a bit in NLP. They've made at least I think they made 2 acquisitions that were kind of like academic startups out of Oxford University. So they've added a whole bunch of PhDs, computer science PhDs to their staff, and they're definitely looking at NLP. And some of the NLP is getting a lot better. I was trying to remember how Meltwater characterized it for me, but it used to be, I'll send you the classic story. The classic story is a ship leaves Florida, leaves Miami, and it goes into the ocean and it sinks, but the Coast Guard saves everybody. Is that positive, neutral, or negative story? Well, it depends on your perspective. The ship going down is negative, but the Coast Guard saved everybody, so that's positive, right? And so a lot of times in a traditional PR system, NLP goes through and tones all the content. You wind up with everything being neutral. And that tells you nothing, right? There's no value there. Everything's neutral. You can go and edit it and change it. What Meltwater has started to try to do is very Google-esque in their approach, where they're applying sentiment analysis to phrases and to sentences and to entire paragraphs. And so you can have a different sentiment analysis even within the same article. The startup that I just mentioned a little while ago, TrueScope, they do something similar. Now they white label their NLP, which is a precursor to AI, right? It's a subset of the AI industry, but they white label their NLP. I forget who they said they did it with. I don't think I wrote the name down just to give them like some, I don't want to give away their secret sauce. I'm not here to expose a vendor.
No.
I just want to understand what they're doing and explain it to the PR community. But in any case, they white label it. And their approach, as I remember, was they are applying sentiment analysis to every like noun in a topic. So if you have a person, place, or thing, they're doing a sentiment analysis for that. So if there's a story about Bob and the Dun and Dunner podcast and Sword in the Script, it's going to apply a sentiment analysis to each one of those, try to get you to a better result, right? And prove the accuracy. The question is, what do you do with it? What does that tell you at the end of the year? If you have 75% positive stories, 20% neutral and 5% negative, what do you do with that?
I don't know. I mean, it's that kind of thing where fuzzy math, I mean, it maybe is a better way to understand what's out there and a better way to do text mining. The thing I'm a little skeptical about as far as AI is the ability to, and I think some do make this claim, to get a sense of an influencer, what pitch they'll bite on or not, or what, to me, it's such a high touch field, and what might interest somebody, what might drive them to cover story. Can you really boil that down to an AI? AI? I don't know. I mean, to me, I don't think we're near there yet.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, but that's what I mean about being able to gain scale. When you buy a technology, it's got to give you the ability to, it's got to make you smarter in some way. But I think that's a very clever use. It's we'll have to see how it explores, how it pans out. I think the other thing that they could do on the monitoring side is, instead of using NLP to tone, is just use NLP to give you the search results that you want, right? What do I mean by that? A big complaint in media monitoring is you start entering your keywords, right? And whatever it is you're monitoring for, and you get all kinds of crap. And you get, what I mean by crap is like, it's all the syndicated content. So I used to years ago, I worked for Vocus. We owned PR Web. I had a monitoring tool for, I used Vocus to monitor, PR Web as a client, if you will, and see what I'm doing from a PR activity side. And as soon as I set that up, every single release that went over the wire, and by the way, all of the syndications for those releases showed up, I'd get millions of results. And it's none of it is what I'm looking for. So I want, and that's an extreme example, but that happens to other people, other PR professionals that are monitoring for a tool or monitoring for a brand name or a keyword that isn't uniquely identifiable. And I think NLP can be applied to help them get better results. And that is a better use, in my opinion, of that technology and that, server calls, if you will, than trying to tone something. That's just my take on it, given where the state of tonality or sentiment analysis is today.
Sounds good. Do you have any advice for full text databases, since more and more content is paywall these days? Is there any?
No, that's one of the questions that you've got to ask. So most of them have partnerships of some sorts. They've got to negotiate it. So certainly probably the larger vendors are going to have some of those things in place. The smaller ones are looking at doing it. I mentioned that TrueScope. I don't want to be an advertisement for them. That's not my intention. But I know that they are that's one of the questions. I just did that briefing and I asked them specifically about that. And they're working on partnerships to get that in there, but they're trying to balance it with cost, right? Because if you strike a partner deal with a publisher to get the whole text into your database, there's a cost associated with that.
Of course.
And that's going to be passed along in the pricing. So I think for PR, it's like, you got to figure out what the balance is. They can certainly alert you to a headline that you've been mentioned, and maybe you click out and buy the access to the sites that you want access to, right? The things that you really need it to. So there isn't a good solution for that yet. Is it possible? It absolutely is possible. You can have every record text that you want. Most of the vendors will be able to provide that to you. You're going to pay for it. It's going to be expensive.
Yeah, I gotta get to another question I had, and that is really point solution versus suite. Are there times it makes sense to go out just rather than go through one of the suites, just go directly to Alexis Nexus or whoever's offering that kind of service, or pick an area? I mean, one problem I found with the suites, I've tried a number of them. We've actually contracted with a number of them over the years. Is one may have better reporting, one may have a better reporter database, one may have that built-in CRM for pitch campaigns, but I don't think any one system has the best in every category.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that's a decision that you have to make internally and weigh that against your needs and costs. And again, is it something that's going to give you scale to deliver services for an agency, or efficiency? There's still a sense of that even on the corporate communication side, because they are in fact delivering a service to the business, right? So they want to get scale and efficiency out of the tools, and you've got to weigh all of those things against what you're buying. I think if you ask any vendor on the market today, who is your number one competitor? You know what they all tell you? Free tools. Because there's a lot of these things that can be done on your own. You can monitor with Google Alerts and TalkWalker free alerts, right? That can happen. You can use Hunter.io to find an email and a Excel spreadsheet to create a media list. And so sometimes they can do those things faster, but when you go to pitch your story and the journalist has changed, suddenly that doesn't have that value for you anymore. Like, gosh, I could just do it myself. If I'm gonna do it myself anyway, because the contact has changed and the database hasn't been updated, then I'm just not going to pay the vendor to do that. So they run into that problem. And I think for communicators, whether you're on the agency or the in-house side, the way to be good at the free tools is to be very strict in process, a very well-defined process. Everybody on your team follows the same process. Every media list will look exactly the same way, right? And these are the things that are going to be included on it. Here's how we find those emails. Here's when we update it. If you're going to track your coverage in a spreadsheet, everybody does it the exact same way.
Yeah.
We're going to agree on like what's a story, what's a mention, what's a backlink, what's a however we're going to characterize it at the end of the year. If we're going to use something like Moz's domain authority to give it a quality score, you standardize it, right? And that's how you kind of get around that and get some efficiency. Where you start to run into problems, I think, is when you have a really large team. And that's where technology can start to help you enforce that standardization, if you will.
Sounds a little painful to me and probably hard to get to, but that, if you're a real tinkerer and could do the DIY thing, then that's fine. But I mean, there must be a middle ground between free, the monolithic suite, and then maybe other point solutions in between that it makes sense to couple together rather than go out and buy a suite. What do you think?
Yeah, it could. Again, depends on your needs. I mean, if you want to, do your media lists in Excel because you think you get better data that way, and you're going to have your AEs help, or your junior AEs keep that up to date. Great. Maybe that works for you, but you have a client that really dings you because you didn't know about news coverage first. Well, maybe you want to buy a professional media monitoring tool for that one. Or maybe it's the reverse. Maybe they don't care. They just want a summary at the end of the month of all the placements. And you can handle that part manually, but you're going to go get a database because you can't afford to have AEs looking online to add, update contacts. So that's the balancing game. And, if you're, obviously if you're an agency owner, those are the things that you've got to weigh. And same thing in-house, because corporate counsel doesn't have corporate communications doesn't have an infinite amount of resources either, right? They're trying to make do, and they make a similar decision with their agencies, right? They tend to outsource stuff. They'll outsource media relations or content creation, or the things that they don't have time or the energy or the ability to focus on doing in-house because they're in meetings all day, right? So they can't write a blog post. They don't have time to do that. Well, that's the balance that we've got to make as leaders.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, you've been extremely helpful with your time. We really appreciate your insight. Is there anything, I'm trying to remember, I had sent you a fairly long list of questions. I think we've covered just about everything, pretty much. Anything else you want to add in, maybe about what you're working on, or maybe we haven't gotten to yet?
Yeah, I guess the only question on there is you asked me a little about Ukraine. I don't know if
Oh,
you want to
good
talk
point.
about that or not.
Given your military background, it'd be great to get your perspective. Anything at all you can
I mean, it's a crazy situation. I personally, wish we were doing more. But you got to think that, like, it's kind of like being a football player training your whole life, and then the big game comes and you don't suit up. So I kind of have that sense, that draw, that having served in uniform, something like this happens, I want to go do something about it.
I can
So
imagine.
I wish America was doing a little more. But I think, the Ukrainians are doing an amazing job. Every analysis that I've seen is, they just stymied the Russians. They went in overconfident. They didn't have enough troops. The supply chains got jacked up. They can't get fuel, food, bullets, beans, any of that stuff there. And then, from a PR perspective, one of your questions was like, is newsjacking on the table? I think like, no, like stay away from
Not any
that.
kind, no kind, huh?
You can never newsjack on a tragedy.
That's good to
You
know.
can't,
Well, is that what all newsjacking is? I mean, you're writing the headlines and the story that leads. So I mean, typically it's yeah. I hear what you're
Yeah, I
saying
think,
now.
yeah, you can't do it on tragedy. I think, you got to pick and choose the ones you can go after. If there's I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna say
I
something.
don't want to talk you out of it. I mean, we've done almost no newsjacking of that conflict, so I think we do agree on that. But don't you think Zelensky's doing a great job?
Amazing from a communications perspective.
Yeah.
Just the guy is amazing. It's certainly, I grew up as an actor in a comedy, so I've read, and that was his profession before he got into politics, and it has served him well. I mean, he's an excellent communicator. He seems to have the ability to kind of read the room and know when he can press down and be a little sharper, and when he needs to pedal back. His presentation to the U.S. Congress, using multimedia elements that were very moving. There are members of Congress that walked out of there crying. The guy from a communications perspective has done amazing. And then, what was the point he said when the thing first happened? The U.S. offered him a ride out. He's like, my country's getting invaded. I don't need a ride. I need bullets. I need ammunition. That's got to be galvanizing for their people.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt in my mind that, it's what they're fighting for. And he's giving them something to give hope in. When the American Revolution happened, the Americans were, a hodgepodge of people fighting against the largest army, most sophisticated army in the world. We were supposed to lose that match. But one of the things is A, we didn't fight by the rules, and B, we knew the country, and C, we're fighting for our homeland. And those things are all true today over in the Ukraine.
Yep, absolutely. They say the Russians are supposed to be excel at information warfare, but the information game, the communications game, it doesn't seem like they're doing too well. Of course, they're on a terrible mission, but it just seems like, that they have a real black eye globally, and,
Yeah, well, there's a communications point there too, and that is PR and communication is supposed to be the so-called conscience of the organization, right? So we speak truth to power. When the executive team is making a decision and going down a wrong path, we'll step up and say that, right? From a communication standpoint. And I think the guy in charge over in Russia isn't getting that feedback. He has surrounded himself with people that only tell him what he wants to hear. If you tell him what he doesn't want to hear, you're going to wind up in the gulag. It's just not going to end well for you. And so everybody tells him what he wants to hear, and he doesn't get good information. He's not getting good information in. He can't make good decisions either. That's one small point in a larger context. I think the guy's obviously got larger aspirations, it's stemming back to the Soviet era. So, but from a communication standpoint, I think that's, one of the interesting takeaways. So you see one on both sides. There's one for the reception of information and communication on the Russian side.
Yep.
And the communication ability on the Ukrainian side with President Zelensky.
Yep, 100%. At any rate, thank you, Frank, for coming on and sharing your insight with our audience. And I'm going to put your information in the show notes if people know how to find you. And with that, I hope we talk again soon and maybe meet at some point. And why don't we close out with the Zoom 5, okay? Zoom 5, there we go.